Buenos días. Quiero decir dos cosas en español. Gracias por invitarme y por esta oportunidad de hablar con personas que están haciendo la infraestructura verde sucede en el mundo. Como científico, recibo la mayor satisfacción de mi trabajo dos cosas. Obviamente, siempre es emocionante para hacer un nuevo descubrimiento, pero igual de emocionante es la oportunidad de hablar con las personas que pueden traducir los nuevos descubrimientos en práctica, en hacer del mundo un lugar mejor. Y en segundo lugar, pido disculpas, me hubiera gustado hablar en español, pero aprendí español hace 40 años y no podía entrar en toda mi charla en Google Translate. Today, I would like to share with you a very, very new discovery that took 30 years to make. 30 years, hundreds of studies involving millions of people, and the work of scientists all over the world. This discovery is very surprising to some people and not at all surprising to others. But it means that green infrastructure's social and public health impacts are every bit as important as GI's impacts on floodwater management, energy use, climate change, etc. And when you are estimating the economic impact of green infrastructure, the value of green infrastructure's social and public health impacts may by themselves be much larger than all the other economic benefits combined. So what is this discovery? This discovery is that nature is an essential component in a healthy human habitat. And that means that in creating the modern world, we have been making an important mistake. It means that most of us, most of the time, are suffering from nature deficit disorder. This is a radical idea. I mean, do you feel like you have a deficit? Does the CDC, the U.S.'s Disease Center for Disease Control, have a minimum daily requirement of nature? Does your CDC equivalent have a minimum daily requirement? No. Currently, we view nature as a treat, something yummy if you can afford it, but no big deal if you can't. In fact, even if you can, maybe there are better things you should spend that money on, right? So, we routinely destroy places like these and we routinely make places like these. This is not a prison. This is a school, and not only is it a school, it is an award-winning school. So we give awards for this. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble. The great biologist E.O. Wilson tells us humanity is a biological species living in a biological environment. And like all species, we're exquisitely adapted to the environment in which we evolved. If we look at human evolution from the time we first developed really good tools about 2.5 million years ago, we are nomadic. We took shelter wherever we could find it for almost the entire time. Charlene, pack up the cave. The antelope are on the move. So this is human evolutionary history. From the Stone Age to the present, what fraction of this were we in settlements? Ugh. Just that little sliver at the end. All right? So while our species has spent time in many different environments, semi-arid, savanna, forests, coasts, for the vast majority of our time, we've lived in daily contact with nature. What does that have to do with modern life? Yes, the way we live now as a species is not the way we used to live. Maybe you're thinking, but I like indoor plumbing. Surely what we have now is better. Now, not only do we have food and water and shelter, we have amazing conveniences, amazing technology. But we know from zoos that it's not enough to give an animal food, water, and shelter, although we haven't actually tried giving them iPhones. Some of us remember when a zoo was just a long series of cages with animals. In these cages, the animals were given everything we thought they needed. Shelter, water, all the monkey or lion chow they could want. But it turns out that the animals died at a terrible clip. In fact, quite a bit faster sometimes than they might die in the wild without all their needs being met. And this was very expensive for the zoos. So over time, zoos experimented a lot in how they housed their animals. And eventually they hit upon the secret. The more an animal's habitat in the zoo resembled their ancestral habitat, the environment in which that animal evolved, the better the animal did. And this was true for all animals, from birds to pandas to great apes. So now when we go to the zoo, all we can see is ancestral habitats. Sorry, I don't have one. So now when we go to the zoo, all we can see is ancestral habitats. Where's the giraffe, Mommy? Oh, look, it's way back there. No, that wasn't it. Animals do best in the habitats in which they evolved. Study after study tells us, oh, study after study tells us this. Organisms in unfit habitats undergo social, psychological, and physical breakdown. All right? That's from all zoos ever. Okay, so let's look at the evidence. And I'm just giving you a tiny, tiny taste of the giant body of evidence. What does social breakdown look like? You may be working and living in a community where there is social breakdown. Social breakdown is when people interact in ways which are not healthy, which are not good. What forms of social breakdown do you see in your communities? Okay. One thing that happens when you house organisms in unfit habitats, for example, overcrowded cages, is you see a lot of aggression. More aggression than you might see in wild or in more suitable habitats. Might this be true of humans? And if so, how would we find out short of putting people in cages? So that's social breakdown in another species. How would you look at the effects of having access to nature or more or less access to nature in humans. It turns out that Chicago public housing is a giant ready-made experiment for researchers like me to go find out. There are lots of architecturally identical apartment buildings. So for each kind of building, you see many other copies of it. And as you can see, the amount of greenery around a building really varies. In the top right corner, we have nothing. Next to it, though, we have 3/4 coverage. Over here to the right and the bottom, we have full coverage. And then over here we have on the left, we have some coverage, right? So you can sample different levels of access to nature in architecturally identical settings. And furthermore, the families are assigned to whatever building happens to open up at the time that they are granted housing. This is public housing. So there's no reason to expect that for some reason the smarter or the healthier people end up in certain buildings and not in others. They just take whatever apartment opens is there when they get to the top of the list. So we had expert interviewers go to different apartment buildings and ask residents, how do things go when you have an argument? And sure enough, in the greener buildings, the folks said they were more likely to handle arguments in positive ways, by talking them through or appealing to a third party. They were also less likely to handle arguments in negative ways, to hit the person they were arguing with, or threaten them with a knife or gun, or even use a knife or gun. But those findings were based on what residents told us. Just how good were those expert interviewers? To double check, we asked the Chicago Police Department, well, we begged, to let us look at crime records. And what we found is that greener apartment buildings have fewer violent crimes. And since then, the same pattern has been found in a number of other studies in many other places. Nature deficits have been tied to social breakdown in a whole range of ways. And here's just a tiny taste of the findings. So without the urban forest, you get more aggression, more violence, higher rates of police reports of assault, battery, robberies, homicide, as well as thefts, burglaries, arson, total crime, and loneliness. This looks like social breakdown to me, yes? With the urban forest, or with more urban forest, we see stronger and more neighborhood social ties, more social activities, more social support. So I ask my neighbor, can you take my kid while my mom is sick, I need to run and take care of her, can you watch my kids? That kind of social support is really important for people in general, but particularly for low-income populations who may not have other resources. They need to depend on the people that they live near. More trust, more altruism, more generosity, more feelings of belonging and feeling safe. If any of these particular findings is of interest to you, let me know now and I will tell you a little bit about them. Do any of these sound particularly interesting? Generosity. This is one of my favorite studies. This is a study conducted by some folks at, I think they're in SUNY Buffalo. So they were interested in the effects of greenery, but they didn't want to go out into the real world to study it. So they did this in a lab. They had undergraduates come into the lab and they say, you have to watch a slideshow and then fill out a questionnaire. And so they might have a slideshow with pictures of urban scenes, nice urban scenes in black and white. Or they might have a slideshow of nature scenes, also black and white. So maybe you get the nature slideshow and you get the urban slideshow. And then afterwards, they say, okay, here, fill out this questionnaire. What is important to you in your life? What are your most important goals? And after watching the green slideshow, people are more likely, or they report that it's more important to them to have deep and strong relationships and to contribute to society. Oh, that's paper pencil questionnaire. Who knows? Maybe that's true. Maybe that's not. So the researcher tried another test. So they had people come in, and either they had a room full of plants or no plants. And then after they spend some time in the room, they say, thank you very much for participating in the study. Here is your fee for helping us today. Here's our $5. Oh, by the way, my roommate is collecting for a charity for the March of Dimes, and you don't have to contribute, but I'm just going to leave the can here, and if you'd like to, that'd be great. And then they leave, and after the students leave, they come back and they count the money, and they see larger donations after experience of plants. So it's completely controlled. Students are randomly assigned to either be in the plants or the no plants, in the nature slides or in the urban slides. It's completely randomized. And so multiple studies have shown these different findings. All right, psychological breakdown. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. There we go. Academic achievement. This is a study that has not yet been published. So you can't tell anyone about it. Okay? This is a study conducted in Chicago Public Schools. We got 10 years worth of Chicago Public School academic achievement standardized tests. Roughly 500,000 test scores for over 470 schools. And we did a few things. First, for a particular year, we looked at how green the school was in that year and how their test scores were. And if I told you, wow, the greener schools had better test scores, and I think it's because of the trees, then you should laugh me out of the room. The greener schools are wealthier. Of course they have higher test scores. So what we did was we controlled for pupil-teacher ratio, the percentage of African Americans, the percentage of Hispanics, the percentage of children who are eligible for free lunch. And we said, okay, given the kind of resources you have as a school and the kinds of students that you have to teach, what test scores would we expect you to have? And then we see, are the greener schools performing better than expected or worse than expected? And sure enough, the greener schools perform better than expected. Furthermore, we looked longitudinally over time. So we know the city of Chicago did about 100 schools, greened about 100 schools in their 470 plus list collection of schools. And then what we did was we followed these schools over time. Some schools were greened earlier, some schools were greened later. So we just looked, okay, how do your test scores look over time? Maybe they're, like this, going along here, over time. This year this, and then this year this, and then this year this, and then this year this. And then after greening, do we see a bump? Do we see that your scores increase? And then does that increase hold over time? And does that increase hold differently for different children? So what did we find? First of all, yes, there is a bump. So for the same school, the same teachers, the same principal, after greening, we see a bump. Test scores go up. Okay, maybe they're just excited that the school has gotten some attention. You know, it looks like people are investing in the school. Maybe that sends a signal to the kids and they think, oh, you know, maybe this is exciting and things are getting better. But what about 7 or 10 years later? By then, the greening is old. It is not new anymore. It is not news. It's not an event. It's just the background. It is just what your school looks like. Even 7 to 10 years later, we see the same effect. We see a bump. Not only do we see this bump, but we see this bump accumulates over the years. That is to say, if you follow a child who enters this school and they get a bump in their 3rd grade, then in their 4th grade, they not only keep that bump, but they add to it. So over the course of multiple years in a school, they get the benefit of the greening every year, and it builds on its previous effects. Furthermore, this effect is strongest for the children who need it most. It is strongest for children who are free lunch eligible, who are sufficiently poor that they are entitled to free lunch in our system. It is stronger, this effect is greater for people who are persons of color. It is stronger for bilingual English as second language students. Interestingly, it is not stronger for students who need special education. So it is not just that students who are doing worse show a bigger bump. It is students who are having harder lives because of poverty, most likely. And so what's interesting there is that we have an opportunity to affect the performance of the students about whom we are most worried and whom we've had most difficulty raising their scores. Any questions? Oh, all right. Let's talk a little bit about academic, no, we already talked about academic achievement. Let's talk about depression. Oh, that's so depressing to talk about. Depression is very, very common in the US. I don't know if that's true here. So I think there is something about modern urban life which seems to be contributing to depression. If we look at the amount of vegetation around a person's home, that's my home. Now you know where I live. You can come visit. If we look at the amount of greenery around a person's home, sorry, I'm having trouble. The more green it is around their home, the less likely they are to feel depressed or to develop clinical depression. This finding comes from over 345,000 people in the Netherlands, and it takes income into account. And then another study in Wisconsin also showed the same effect. So this is true for Americans at least, as well as the Dutch. Yet another study in London examined the frequency of mood disorders by tracking prescriptions. They compared pharmacies in greener and less green sections of the city. So this pharmacy serves people in this area. This pharmacy serves people in this area. And you say, okay, when we take into account what income the people who live around that pharmacy have, now we compare pharmacies with the same who serve similar populations in income, but one is greener and one is less green. How do the pharmacy prescriptions for mood medications differ? And they differ just like you'd say. The greener the neighborhood that the pharmacy serves, the fewer mood-related medications it dispenses. So depression, this incredibly common mental disorder, may not have to be as common as it is. In fact, 1 out of every 4 clinically depressed people might not be depressed if they lived in a green neighborhood. This is crazy, yes? Crazy, crazy findings. But this is not the only finding like this. There are many, many signs of psychological breakdown which have been tied to urban nature or the urban forest. So without the urban forest, we see more clinical depression, more anxiety disorders, more ADHD. I don't know what that is in your, is also called ADHD? Okay. Sadness, fatigue, more stress, more distress, more procrastination, more impulsivity, less discipline. With more urban forest, you get higher academic achievement, more ability to concentrate, more effectiveness in managing major life issues, greater capacity to delay gratification, greater feelings of self-worth, more awe, the experience of awe, more vitality, more relaxation, more capacity for independent living among older adults. This is the picture of psychological breakdown and psychological health. Yes? All by themselves, without looking at social breakdown or physical breakdown. Wouldn't these alone be worth greening? All by themselves? Oh, do you want to hear about any of these? Feelings of self-worth, that was from a study conducted in rural New York. So they compared, the researchers went to visit these different homes where kids lived, and they said, they took pictures of the views from the different windows, and they marked how green the yard was. And then they asked the kid on a separate occasion, tell me how, do you feel very good about yourself or not so good or terrible? How do you feel? And the children's feelings of self-worth were tied to how green their home environment was. The greener, the more sense of self-worth. Anything else? ADHD? ADHD? This is a series of studies that my colleague Andrea Faber-Taylor and I conducted with, I think William Sullivan is involved in at least one of them. So the very first study was a very small survey, just 100 or 150 people. We asked parents who have kids with ADHD, how are your kids' symptoms after doing different kinds of activities? So playing basketball indoors, playing basketball outdoors in a green place, reading indoors versus reading in the backyard. And we made all these kinds of comparisons, and parents said, oh, there's symptoms are bad after this and good after that. And so we looked at all these different reports, and what we found is that parents say their kids' symptoms are systematically better after doing something in a greener setting. Okay, that's kind of exciting. Maybe that's true. Does it really work? To find out, we took children on forced marches. 20 minutes. A lot of kids are not used to walking 20 minutes. 20 minutes with a researcher. We walk through a park, or we walk through a residential area that is a little less green, or we walk through a nice, safe, quiet, pleasant downtown urban area. No greenery. Well, very little. And afterwards, at the end of the walk, they go into a building where someone else, not the person who went on the walk with them, the person inside the building does not know which walk these kids went on. She tests their concentration with the following test. It's called digit span backwards. I will tell you a few digits, and you remember them and repeat them back to me in reverse. 5, 1, 7, 4. Good, you're doing fine. The test is very difficult if you just even get to 6 or 7 digits. It becomes much harder. It's used, this test is used when somebody has a head injury, has a car accident, their head hits the windshield. We use this to see if they're doing okay. We also ask them who is president, but among Americans, not everyone knows. But we do this test, and it turns out that the effect of the green walk, I take the same person. I take you on the walk through the park one day, and then maybe you go second in the urban neighborhood, and then maybe second you go in the urban downtown, or third you go in the urban downtown. You do them in different order. And then I test you all 3 times, and then I compare your scores to your scores, and your scores to your scores. And I look for the differences. And it turns out that after the green walk, children are concentrating systematically better than they were in the other walks. And not only are they concentrating better, the difference is roughly the same as the peak effect, the largest effect that you get from methylphenidate or Ritalin. So when you take Ritalin, it takes a while for it to start to take effect, and then there's a high point where you are focused and you are concentrating, and then it slowly declines. Okay? So that peak effect is the same size as the effect of the nature walk. We don't know how long it lasts. We don't know how long the nature walk lasts, but we know that right after the walk, it's as big an effect as methylphenidate. The final study for ADHD was, we said, okay, this is very exciting. Let's see how common this is. So we conducted a national study. How many parents? I think it was 450, something like that. 450 parents from all over the United States, from Oregon, Arizona, more similar to here maybe, the southeast, so Florida, from suburban Washington, D.C., from rural areas, from big cities, all kinds of different environments, children from 5 to 18, boys and girls, children who have the just the attention problems, children who have impulsivity problems or hyperactivity problems, all these different kids. And we see the same effect for all of them. Whether they are in a city or in a rural area, whether they are young or old, whether they are a boy or a girl, whether they have attention deficits only or impulsivity as well, we see the same effect for all those kids. So this is kind of exciting, or at least I thought it was kind of exciting. What about physical breakdown? All right. Let's talk just about cardiovascular disease and, let's just start with that. How many here have someone or themselves in their family who has experienced any of the following? Heart attack, stroke, high blood pressure. Okay, how many do not have anyone in their family with any of those things? Wait. How many, how many have a family free of all those problems? Free of all those problems. Very few, right? Very few. You are lucky. I am happy for you. So cardiovascular disease is common. It is almost normal. It is almost normal in this world. Could increasing people's contact with nature help? A walk in the woods markedly changes the contents of a person's blood. Let's say You and I take a walk. We go to a woods nearby. Do you guys know some woods? Where would we go? Parque, blah, blah, blah. So we go to this park, and I bring a syringe. After a while, after we have walked some time, and we get to a nice stopping place, I take your blood. If I took your blood, I would find more adiponectin, which fights atherosclerosis, and more DHEA, which is dihydroepiandrosterone, which fights heart disease and diabetes. A whole host of harmful chemicals that raise blood pressure and do various bad things to you would be reduced. So a walk in the woods is good for your heart. What's more, green neighborhoods cultivate cardiovascular health. People who live in green neighborhoods have lower blood pressure. People taking income into account. People who live in green neighborhoods are less likely to develop cardiovascular disease, less likely to die from cardiovascular disease if they get it. And if a person in a green neighborhood has a stroke, they are more likely to survive. All of this is true even when we take income into account. So it is not just that richer people buy better health, although they do. We can grow better health also. Diabetes. Diabetes is the leading cause of death in Mexico. I looked this up. So maybe some of you are familiar with some of the very outcomes of diabetes. Anyone? What are some of the outcomes of having diabetes? Blindness, amputation, kidney failure. These are serious. These are really serious things. Well, what can I tell you? A single walk in the woods, but not in an urban setting, increases adiponectin and DHEA, which fight diabetes. It improves your insulin levels, and it brings blood glucose down to normal. Or not, no. It moves it closer to normal, okay? It moves it closer to normal. How much does it move it closer to normal? Well, half an hour in the woods, of walking in the woods, nice, calm, relaxed, happy, does more for you than 3 hours on a stationary bike. Isn't that crazy? Not only that, if I make you take a monthly walk in the forest, I can reduce your glycated A1C, for I don't know how many of you know what that is, but it's a blood marker that tells us, helps us diagnose you as diabetic or not. It brings it to 6.5. 6.5 is the threshold level. It's the level where if you are above it, we say diabetic. If you are below it, we say not. So it brings people who are diabetic to the very threshold of not being diabetic. I don't remember. I think it's monthly. I think it's, that doesn't sound right, does it? I have to check. In the woods. Well, we don't know about city with trees. All we know is they tested the woods versus city without trees. Each study has its limitations. Furthermore, the people who live in greener places, so I'm taking you out of the woods now. we're in the neighborhoods now. People who live in greener places have a systematically lower risk of diabetes, controlling for income. This is true in the Netherlands in a study of 345,000 people. 345,000 people controlling for income. They looked at satellite images of each person's postal code, which contains about 20 households. How green is it within 1 kilometer or 3 kilometers of the person's postal code? And then what is the rate of diabetes? They have nationalized health care, so all these records are centralized. They can do this. We do not. We in the US do not, so I can't tell you. But not only do we find this effect, but the effect is stronger if you look within 1 kilometer than if you look within 3 kilometers. Isn't that interesting? It suggests that it's the greenness that we know you experience that matters. Not only did that work get conducted in the Netherlands, but Estelle Burt and folks conducted this in Australia with 267,000 Australians. Same finding. I should mention this is not true for all possible measures of greenness. So you can look at how green it is within the 1 kilometers or 3 kilometers, or you can say how close is your nearest park, or we can have different kinds of measures of greenness. And I think the distance to park does not predict diabetes. But the greenness around your home, that does, okay? This is also not true at the city scale. If I say, how green is your city overall, and how green is your city, and then I look at the diabetes rates for those two cities, I don't see any effect. I don't know why. But still there's all this work that the greenness around your home predicts your diabetes. And again, that's just a little bit of the evidence. Without the urban forest, or with less urban forest, you see more cardiovascular disease, more diabetes mellitus, more obesity, more upper respiratory tract infections or colds, more musculoskeletal complaints of any kind, more chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, more acute urinary tract infections, more vertigo, more migraine, more severe headaches, more infectious diseases of various kinds, and some cancers. With the urban forest, we see more adiponectin, more DHEA, more faster healing from surgery. Some of you may already know this study. Better normalized blood glucose, better birth outcomes, better birth weights, and better immune functioning. Take your pick. Not interested? Healing from surgery. This study looked at cholecystectomy patients who are people who are going in for gallbladder surgery. This is conducted in 1984, well, before in 1984, published in 1984. In one hospital, there are not a huge number of people in the sample, but they looked at people who happened to be assigned to a recovery room that has a view of trees versus a recovery room that looks onto a brick wall. And they found that the patients and they looked for patients who were matched, you know, roughly the same age, the same general state of health, blah, 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 okay? So we compare these two people who we would expect to recover at the same rate, and what do we find? The person in the green view, with the green view, takes fewer pain medications, or no, they take milder pain medications and fewer of the hard stuff. They take fewer days to be discharged, and the nurses complain about them less. I think that one's really, really funny. So better recovery from surgery if you have a green view. Any others? Cancer. Okay, what I know is that this has been shown for some cancers, but not all. There's work in Shanghai, and I'm not remembering the other place. But it's physician diagnoses of cancer. It's not self-report. And again, it's looking at the greenness objectively via satellite photos. if you're interested. It's the normalized normalized NDVI, normalized differential vegetation index, based on satellite imagery. Okay? Anything else? No? Okay. So, contact with nature helps and protects us in all kinds of ways. In fact, it's a lot like a vitamin. And someday, I think there will be a recommended minimum daily dose of nature. But this raises a question. What should that dose be? What I can tell you are three things. First, big doses have big effects. This is, the red cell is a cancer cell, and the two yellow cells are part of our immune system. Their job is to seek out and destroy cancer. They're called natural killer cells. The natural killer cell is like a vigilante. All the other cells in our white blood cell system are cautious. They do not shoot the innocent. They only attack things after they have been proven to be destructive. So they are good. They are operating as the police should. But the natural killer cells, they are looking around for bad guys. And if you look suspicious, even if you're one of us, even if you're from my same body, and you are acting weird, then I will attack you. Not only will I attack you, I will inject little granules into you, will glom onto you, and inject granules into you, which will make you explode. Are they good? Are they bad? I don't know. They are very important in the fight against cancer. So your natural killer cells are our cancer fighting cells. And people who have a good supply of natural killer cells, enough, lots, are 40% less likely to get cancer than people who are a little short on natural killer cells. 40% less likely. How does contact with nature affect your natural killer cell supply? A long weekend, 3 days, in a forest preserve boosts your supply of these cells by 50%. 3 days, 50% more, okay? And if we come back and take your blood 30 days later after your nice weekend, right? So you have this nice weekend and then you go to your normal life and then 30 days later I say, okay, I need your blood again. I take your blood and I find that the natural killer cells are still up 23% over your original. So a long weekend in a nice urban setting, no effect on your supply of natural killer cells. So big doses of nature have big, lasting, important effects on our health. And that means that parks and green areas are not only natural resources, they are health resources. And while spending a weekend in a spectacular natural area is a treat, yes, it is a treat. It's also really, really good for you. It is as though scientists had discovered that broccoli was as good for you as steak. You're welcome. Tiny doses have real effects. So you might think that compared to a weekend in the wilderness, a tiny dose of nature, the kind you get in your everyday life, isn't going to count for much. Does driving along a greener road on your way home from work, does that do you any good? If you look out on a green view from your kitchen as you wash the dishes at the end of a long day, is it just a pleasant experience and nothing more? It turns out that even tiny doses of nature have measurable impacts. The scent of roses reduces the stress hormone cortisol in your blood. 5 minutes of looking at pictures of nature can turn your nervous system around and put you in the opposite of fight or flight mode. 5 minutes of playing with soil had the same effect. Every small choice you make to build contact with nature into your day makes a real difference. And in fact, the tiny doses that you experience throughout the day, they add up. Oh, there's our soil. Everyday doses have huge effects. So if you think about the greenery in your neighborhood, and I hope you do have greenery in your neighborhood, they're part of the backdrop of your everyday life. You probably don't notice them most of the time. But as you already know, the more street trees, the better cardiovascular health, the less obesity, the less diabetes. That's so 5 minutes ago. But how big is this effect? How much of a difference does it make? In a study of 2 million people in Toronto, Canada, scientists calculated that adding 11 street trees on a city block gives you the health boost equivalent to a $20,000 increase in income for everyone in the neighborhood. 11 trees on a city block is the equivalent in terms of the health boost of $20,000 increase in income annual for everyone in the neighborhood. I don't know what that translates to in pesos, but a lot. or making folks 1.4 years younger. So we could decide to shell out the money to plant 11 trees on a block. Or we could give each household in the neighborhood $20,000 more a year. Or we can turn back time. This is an easy choice, yes? How much money, what is the cost of 11 street trees compared to the kinds of health care costs we would avoid? How much money could we save in healthcare costs if we routinely provided green neighborhoods for everyone, rich and poor? So, let's summarize. In sum, I hope I've convinced you that contact with nature is important for social, psychological, and physical health. That it works like a vitamin, and that its impacts on health are huge. Every bit helps, and everyday nature is crucial. Okay, so what? Maybe that was interesting, maybe that was surprising, maybe it's intriguing. What does this have to do with you and your work? I would like to offer some suggestions for maximizing the social and public health benefits of green infrastructure. I will offer suggestions for where to put green infrastructure, what kind of green infrastructure to put, and how to do it. Where to put it, what to put, and how to do it. First of all, where? Put green infrastructure where it maximizes GPM. GPM is greenness person minutes. Still confusing, right? What is that? The total number of people minutes that your greening is impacting. So, if I go to your home or the place you spend most of your time and I green that, I have a maximum effect on you as an individual because I am affecting many of your person minutes. If I green as you have been doing along the arterials, because many people pass through those arterials in a given day, I am maximizing person minutes. Maybe few minutes, but many people. Put green infrastructure where it maximizes person minutes. The product, what you get when you multiply the number of people by the number of minutes. And I think you can think about, you can immediately come up with what places those are, right? So that's a general rule. In addition, it makes sense to put green infrastructure where disease burdens are the highest and the green is the least. Where is that? Poor neighborhoods. That's true not only in Mexico, but in the US and in many other places. This is a shot of Chicago, rich and poor. These are the same scale. These are taken from the same satellite. Okay, so it's kind of obvious. And it turns out that when you look at satellite imagery from all over the world, Sao Paulo, Munich, London, Paris, Oakland, California, Chicago, this is the story. Rich and poor are visible from space. The difference is visible from space. So in country after country, we see this difference in the greenness of the rich neighborhoods versus the poor neighborhoods. And in country after country, we see the difference in health outcomes. Where the rich are healthier, they are less likely to die, they're less likely to get a disease and less likely to die from it than the poor. Is this a coincidence? How much of the two differences is actually related? How much of the difference in health outcomes is due not just to differences in wealth, but to their environments, to the greenness of their environments? A fantastic study in the United Kingdom involving 40 million death records. So they looked at the death records for almost the entire population. Not children up to 18 and not adults who are retired. But between 18 and 65, 40 million records over 2 years, 40 million people, death records for those folks over 2 years. And what they did was they compared people who live in equally green neighborhoods but who are rich or poor. Does that make sense? So I say, okay, let's look at just very green neighborhoods. Very green neighborhood, here's a rich person, here's a poor person. How likely is the rich person to die? How likely is the poor person to die? When you don't take what neighborhood they live in into account, you get a huge gap. Poor person, much more likely to die. Rich person, much less likely to die. When you only compare them if they have similar greenness, then the difference is cut in half. It's not a perfect study. There are potential problems with it, but that is a giant number. That is a giant effect, and it is definitely worth pursuing. All right, so that was where you should put green infrastructure. You should put green infrastructure where there are the most health burdens and where there is the least green, which is generally the poor neighborhoods. But in addition, what kind of GI should you do? Well, this is a word I made up. Phytotropic. Phyto meaning plant, and tropic, plant loving, right? Plant attracting. So humans are phytotropic. Like the moth goes to the flame, humans go towards vegetation. If we build green spaces that are phytotropic, that attract people, then we can use species-wide techniques for maximizing greenness person minutes. You say, what are these techniques? Ask your local landscape architect. They know. They know how to make places that attract people and keep people. You provide seating, you make it attractive, you make it comfortable. You add elements like food or walking paths or interesting things to look at like other people or animals. Shadows, yes, dappled light. But you can also do user-specific green infrastructure. So if you are working in a neighborhood where there are many older adults, then you can build walking paths for them to get exercise. If you're working in a neighborhood where there is a shortage of exercise space or of activity, recreational space for teenagers, then maybe you can install basketball courts in that setting. Because the basketball courts will attract those kids to use that space and spend time in it. Remember, in the ADHD, in the ADHD work, if you are doing basketball in a green setting, it is better for you than basketball in an indoor setting. When we make those comparisons, it doesn't matter what your activity is. It matters where, well, no, it's true. Some activities are better for you than others, but for the same activity, it is better that you do it in a green setting than in a not green setting. So find the user-specific green infrastructure. Find out who this space or view is supposed to serve and what they need, what would make them like it or use it. All right? So that's what kind of GI. What about how to do GI? How should you go about green infrastructure? And I only have one suggestion here, which is to work with users. Work with your users. I know it is a lot of work. It is a pain in, it is a pain. But work with users in the design of the spaces and the views and in the greenness. Work with the users in installation. This is where you can save on labor costs. Because the more someone is involved in the installation and the design of a space, the more they feel it is theirs, the more likely they are to use it, the more likely they are to protect it from being harmed, and the more likely they are to help maintain it. So it is an upfront cost for you to involve the users, but it will pay off. I don't know that. As a scientist, I can say we expect that it will pay off. I don't know for sure. But I can tell you that when you work with users in design, it turns out that they are happier with the space and with the trees in many, many ways that have nothing to do with what choices they made. They just like it better. And furthermore, we know that if you have users, residents, helping to maintain trees, their survival 1 year, 3 years out is vastly higher. So you don't have the time and the resources to do that maintenance. This is a way to do that. And the more they maintain it, the more contact with nature they get. So it is good for you and it is good for the residents. So in conclusion, science is telling us that in creating the modern world, we have been making an important mistake. And places like these are importantly wrong. You cannot put people in concrete cages and expect them to be their best. You cannot put them in concrete cages and not expect social, psychological, and physical breakdown. When we time, money, and effort into greening places like these, we are addressing the injustice of completely preventable illnesses and deaths. Preventable illnesses and deaths. So I would like to close by thanking you for your work. Green infrastructure is addressing some of the most important challenges of our time. Climate change, infectious disease, non-communicable diseases. So you are truly making the world a better place, and I hope this information is useful to you as you do so. Thank you.